Welcome to the DNA Talks podcast, where we take on the mission of unlocking the code of your genetics. This season is all about you, upgrading your health, not just on the surface, but down to the root cause. Join us as your clinicians at the DNA company investigate your DNA and beyond. The intention of this podcast is to enhance your lifestyle by changing what is in your control. This does not substitute the medical advice given by your personal doctor, therapist, and other healthcare professionals.
Hello and welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here today at the DNA Talks podcast. I'm Dr. Lara Varden, and I am an in-house clinician here with the DNA company. I'm a holistic health practitioner and functional genomics practitioner. And I have a most delightful talk for everyone today because I have Dr. Guerry Grune with me. He is the founder and CEO of Third Rock Essentials. And we are going to be talking about summertime and wonderful products that Third Rock Essentials has that can help you get through the summertime, whether it be out in the sun and you need some protection, whether you are camping and get a scratch or an insect bite and need something to help out there, or even if you tend to drink a little too much next to the fire and don't want to get a hangover. So we'll be talking about some of these things today. And what I would like to do is I am going to have Dr. Guerry, my new wonderful, brilliant friend, tell us a little bit about himself. So hello and welcome, Dr. Guerry. How are you today?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Dr. Lara. I think as far as brilliance is concerned, I think that you're the lady who's the brilliant one here. I do some stuff, but you can explain the science at a molecular level. And my background is I'm a PhD chemical engineer. And so I consider the body more of a black box, whereas you understand the intricacies of how things actually happen and how things are metabolically absorbed, what happens, with cell biology and microbiology. And that's not my field of expertise. I have a chemistry degree, I have a mechanical engineering degree, a material science degree, 2 degrees in chemical engineering, and a doctorate in chemie, and did a lot of work in polymer science. So that's my background. It's a lot different. But I've developed an interest in formulating products, which, of course, I did not learn that in school. I'm not a formulation chemist by training at all. So formulation chemistry is sort of, I think, like Merlin the magician. You put stuff together and you hope it works, and there's a lot of trial and error involved. And product formulation is a science in itself.
That it is. It's kind of like just, throw something in the black box, shake it up, and see what comes out. And hopefully it does what you want.
Right. Well, the black box in our case
part of what biohacking is.
Yes. Well, of course, we say garbage in is garbage out, right? So the black box, you better feed the black box good stuff, and then hopefully the black box will stay healthy. And then, of course, the black box has to also get rid of waste. So in that regard, my concept of the human body is much more, I would say, instead of micro, macro. Engineers like to approximate everything. And I have a science background too, but, and I can understand when you talk about metabolic pathways and cell receptors and that kind of thing. But that's that's where you're brilliant. And I listen and I learn.
Well, I really appreciate that. You make me blush. Thank you. I honestly, it really is working off of the brilliance of those forerunners who have come before us. And we are just knitting together more of that beautiful tapestry that we call life and understanding the world around us. So, all I'm doing is just tying in a few shiny threads, hopefully, and making that picture better.
I think you're pretty modest about it. I think you're doing more than that, but that's we've had a lot of discussions already about different things that could be done. And so I'm hoping that we can continue to do some more good stuff.
Yes, and I appreciate that. Um, and I want to let the audience know that Dr. Guerry has been on our podcast before. Kashif actually has interviewed him. It was the episode that aired on March 21st, 2024. And they had a beautiful and brilliant conversation getting into Dr. Guerry's genesis of how he created and came up with some of the products, with the company, and why he is doing what he's doing. Even though I would love to hear that story again, I really would like to be able to dive into some other aspects of the business, of the products. Granted that you did in that interview with Kashif, but maybe fleshing out in different ways some of that information. So I would highly recommend our audience, our listeners, to go back and listen to that episode and really gain some incredible information and insights. So, we will be doing a little bit of cross pollination of information from that episode. So, but definitely would say go back and listen. So here it is. Right now, we are recording this in early May, and we are coming up upon summer. Thank goodness I was really getting sick of the cold and snow because I live up in the Northeast and I love the, budding trees, going hiking, going down to the lake or to the ocean, going swimming. And with doing all of that, there comes that interaction with nature, which, hey, love so many benefits. But with nature, there's also bug bites, mosquito bites. There is, going camping and hiking, you get scratched by, limbs and other things. And this is just the nature, pun intended, nature of the business of being out in summer and enjoying yourself. So, what do we do about that when we get these scratches and when we get these bug bites? Well, Dr. Guerry, in his infinite brilliance, has come up with some products that really work for these things. And I'm going to give a couple of my own little anecdotal situations of his products that I have found amazing. And so I have made use of the sales that he has going on by stocking up and like giving it to family and friends and keeping a stash for myself. So let's start off on bug bites because I will tell you what, I am now seeing the bugs coming out. Now, granted, the mosquitoes and black flies are not out in full force yet, but they will be. So that is not fun. And it is very uncomfortable when you have any type of, bug bite or even getting into poison ivy. So, Dr. Guerry, how can you help us with that?
A lot of people have asked me, do you make a bug repellent? And the answer is I could, which is natural and non-toxic. But, all our products, we say if you wouldn't put them in your mouth, they'll put it in your skin. And also we make supplements, which obviously you put in your mouth. So, our mantra is non-toxic products, right? What is toxicity? From my perspective, the definition is cell death. So if you are using something that kills cells, in my definition of things, that's toxic. Now, some cells die anyway, right? Skin cells regenerate, continuously. And you know more about that than I do. But you ask about, bug bites and poison ivy and rashes and all kinds of things that you in nature might experience. And so it turns out that our sunscreen, which is made with chelated zinc oxide. So we chelate. Chelate is a mild reaction for your listeners that don't know. We use L-arginine to chelate with it, and we make a zinc oxide that can't turn into zinc hydroxide, which is a salt, which is why the mineral sunscreens salt out, become toothpaste over time. Our product doesn't do that. We had a lot of people that were contacting us and said, "Hey, Guerry, we're using your stuff for hives. we're using your stuff for mosquito bites. So we made something that's even more concentrated called itch block. And it's highly concentrated form of zinc oxide. The FDA doesn't allow more than 25% zinc oxide in a formulation for sunscreen. So our itch block is probably closer to 50% zinc oxide. We call it calamine lotion on steroids. And so the zinc oxide in the itch block is the same, chelated with L-arginine. And what that does, at least in our experience, is you may remember, while we were growing up, that ammonia is something you could put on a mosquito bite or even on poison ivy or poison oak, and it would have instant relief because the ammonia is basic. And what happens, the way your body works, is when you get a bite or you get poison ivy or you get hives or whatever, your skin starts having antibodies that go to the surface of the skin, and it's actually very acidic. And the reason for the acidity, I think, is that what's happening is it's trying to kill off any infectious bacteria that might happen. Because when you have that kind of thing happen, whether you get a wound or a cut or a scrape or a bite or a poison ivy, your skin is now exposed, right? And your skin's your biggest organ, and your body's trying to protect your skin. Well, what causes the itching a lot of times is this sudden acidity at the surface of the skin. And when you put something on that's basic, you're neutralizing the pH, and you're making the itch or the sting or the whatever sort of go away, right? You're neutralizing the pH. So our sunscreen and our itch block has a pH that's greater than 9.5. And there's a lot of reasons for that. The number one reason was to try to make sure that zinc oxide doesn't turn into zinc hydroxide. It turns out all mineral sunscreens are made, and all sunscreens are made in 70% water. Our product is made in 70% glycerin. But in addition, we chelate it with L-arginine, the zinc, and the zinc oxide never becomes zinc hydroxide. I think in Cash's talk, we said that I made what the lifeguards put on their nose into a lotion, and that wasn't easy to do. It's a formulation that nobody's ever come up with in the past, and the reason for it is not easy to do it. Number one, number two, water's free and glycerin's not, so it's very expensive to make it. But if you want something that's going to last on the skin and take care of things like mosquito bites and bee stings and poison ivy and that kind of thing, the itch block is really a great way to go. And again, it's the chelated zinc oxide that's the number one active ingredient there, and for the sunscreen as well.
Okay, so let me ask you this. One of the main issues with a lot of the sunscreens, people going to all of these beaches, the coral reefs, that it is killing and the coral reefs, and partially due to all of these chemicals. And so they're, for those health conscious, environmentally conscious people out there, they're like, okay, I want to use sunscreens and products that are safe for myself, but also for the environment and not killing our coral reefs and, the life sustaining, for our waters. How does yours compare to that? And how is it,
That's a great question. So that's a great question. So it turns out that glycerin is a sugar. It's basically a long chain molecule that's sweet, and people use it to bake with, et cetera. And again, remember, our product is 70% glycerin, the sunscreen. In addition, the zinc oxide is not pure zinc oxide. It's chelated with L-arginine, which is an amino acid. And it turns out that coral and coral reefs, they're biological organisms that grow rapidly in certain environments and die rapidly in others. So unfortunately, and this is how the whole thing started, and I also do patent work for a living, so I'm a registered patent agent. So our first patent was on a non-endocrine disrupting, cytoprotective, immuno-enhancing sunscreen. Well, that's a lot.
Well, that's a mouthful.
Yes, it's a lot. So I'll break it down. So non-endocrine disrupting, right? No female mimicking hormones. There was a study done by Margaret Schlumpf at the University of Zurich in Switzerland. She's a toxicologist back in the early 2000s. And she determined by lathering the back of female rats with sunscreens that were available organic sunscreens, which you and I and your audience hopefully knows, is carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. It has nothing to do with organic foods. And she lathered the back of female rats with this, and the female rat's uterus grew abnormally large, and that's how she determined they were endocrine disruptors. And of course, I wanted to make something that was non-endocrine disrupting. And of course, how does that feed back into the reef? Well, endocrine disruptors disrupt the ability for these biological organisms to grow and build the reef up. Turns out when we first started making this product, the godfather for my kids and my best friend from college is a diver, and he wanted to go to DEMA, which is the National Diving Association conference, and there we met Denise and her husband Niedermeyer. They had developed a method to grow coral at a 10x rate by producing this very unique sort of cage-like matrix, so that the organisms, the microorganisms, could start to build on these cages and then grow exponentially. Well, it turns out they had already been contacted by some sunscreen companies, one in Australia, a couple in the US, and they took ours. They came back a year later. We went to the conference 2 years in a row. They came back a year later and they said, Guerry, your stuff's the best of all the stuff we've tried. And they said, your stuff actually seems to increase the rate of growth. So we say that we're not just reef safe, we feed the reef. And the reason is the glycerin. The glycerin, I'm sure, the sugar is something that the microorganisms love. And so we on our box, which I can show here, it says, I don't know if you can see it, it's the Coral Reef Foundation. So we're the only folks that have that on our product. And unfortunately, in the world of marketing and sales, there's actually a product out there called Reef Safe. And if you look at the ingredient list and you look at what they've done, it's anything but, unfortunately. It's full of female mimicking hormones, endocrine disruptors. A little bit more on endocrine disruptors. Yeah. So obviously doing a female rat study, not cheap, not simple. Turns out that I have a kinesiologist chiropractor whose brother is internationally known, unfortunately passed away a year ago, November, Walter and John Schmidt. And they're both in the Research Triangle Park area, which is where I worked for IBM for 13 years. He does muscle testing. So when we started formulating the sunscreen, we started doing muscle testing on all of the raws, we call it raws, all the ingredients that go in the sunscreen. And it turns out that one of his first patients is a guy named Dr. George Clark, who developed a way of determining whether something is a endocrine disruptor, a female mimicking hormone, using a bioassay. It turns out the bioassay is with luciferase, which is an enzyme that the fireflies or lightning bugs, depending on where you're from, what you call them, it's how they light up, right? And so it's bioluminescence, excuse me. And so we published in 2005, believe it or not, we published an article on not only the sunscreens that we compared ourselves to, but also the raws, what's put into the sunscreens. And it turns out that you can measure whether something is toxic. In other words, when the cells are killed, these biological cells are killed, this bioassay, what happens is the light, the bioluminescence, dims, right? So you can do this with chemical analyticals techniques, but you can't only measure maybe to 10 to the minus ninth. It turns out that Dr. Clark's assay, he could measure down to 10 to the minus 16th power. That's about as close to zero as you're going to get. That's like 15 zeros, right? 10 to the minus 16th power. So we correlated. Now, this is not in the study. We just talked about it, but we didn't have enough data on the muscle testing to show the direct correlation, but there is absolutely one. And it turns out that all of the raws that we tested were toxic or were causing problems with muscle testing. So muscle testing, as you probably know, but I don't know if your listeners all know, it's a neuromuscular response, right? So your nose is here, right? Your tongue is here, and there's a reason for that because your brain is here. So, you're getting a neuromuscular response instantaneously, which is like pushing on your arm, pushing on your leg, if you taste or smell anything. So whether you taste or smell something that's positive and going to strengthen you or weaken you or have no effect. I mean, let's face it, any substance that you put under your nose or on your tongue is going to have one of three things. It's either not going to affect you either way, it's strengthen you or weaken you. And of course, what does that have to do with? Well, it has to do with the immune system. If you're strengthening your neuromuscular response, at least from my perspective, this black box perspective, right, is that means it's healthy and it's helping you. And that's what you want to put in your body or on your body, is you want to put something that is immuno responsive and, immuno enhancing. So that's why, non-endocrine disrupting and now immuno enhancing, you want to make sure that all the ingredients and anything you put on your skin, your largest organ, is going to benefit your immune system. Well, it turns out there was a 1-to-1 correlation between everything that we tested that was being used by all sunscreen manufacturers, the mirror states, all of the endocrine disrupting active ingredients, the methoxycinnamates, the oxybenzones, the avobenzones, they all muscle tested negative, and they were proven to be endocrine disruptors, or at least toxic, because that luminase cell, that biological cell, was dimming. And so we could measure it, right? It was data that we could measure. Now, of course, this is all in vitro stuff, but still, we didn't lather it on the back of female rats because that's a longer, much more complicated and expensive study. But we basically proved without a doubt that all of these substances were endocrine disruptors and that we could formulate a product that was non-endocrine disrupting. So we had at least from my perspective, we had to prove that. And we did that in 2005. Now, we presented that in March of 2005. I think it was my daughter's birthday. I couldn't go to San Diego because, she was young and I had to be home for her birthday. But they presented it there, my other co-authors. And L'Oreal came up after the conversation and said, "We're glad you didn't put our sunscreen in there." So this is something people have been aware of for a long time, right? It's just that nobody did anything about it, and they're still not. The FDA let it be known in 2011 and 12 when they came out with the last monograph, which the one before that was 1978, that they actually were studying endocrine disruptors and sunscreens. And since 2011, a lot of things have happened. But one thing that hasn't happened is you haven't heard about any test results that the FDA has on endocrine disruptors. Last summer, you heard about benzene in sunscreen. And of course, benzene is coming out of sunscreens because they're putting oxybenzone and avobenzone into sunscreens and been doing it for a long time. And of course, it's very good for UVB and avobenzone for UVA, but not too healthy for humans, and definitely not healthy. No. Going back to your question about the reef, definitely not healthy for the reef. Turns out that what happens as soon as sunlight or energy hits these molecules, they break up. They literally split, right? And what happens, because the energy causes it to split, right? And so what happens is these poor microorganisms that are trying to build the reef, they die. It's toxic to them. So we've been through this for a long time, and there's a lot of science there. Maybe too much for some of the people listening, I don't know. But the correlation between muscle testing, if it's done right, if it's done the right way, in other words, if you really smell it or you really taste it, and whether you have a neuromuscular positive or negative response, to me, that's the way to stay healthy. If you can find someone who will do muscle testing for you for all these different substances that you put in your body or on your body, I think we've talked about this, Dr. Lara and I. Everybody's different. Everybody's system is different. Everybody's immune system is different. I know there was a study, I'm going to say 2018 maybe, or 2019. It was on identical twins. And they fed them the same thing. They had the same routine. They did the same, ate the same thing, had this, everything the same as much as they could do, right? And the outcomes were different. And that's identical twins. So I don't know that you can get DNA that's much more close than identical twins. But
Correct.
if identical twins have different outcomes with different things, then you would say that literally every person is different. So what works for Dr. Lara, what
Yeah.
works for Guerry, and what works for your listeners are three different things, most likely. I think that's just the way, that our bodies are built. Is some things work for us and some things don't. I know, I'm just recovering from this thing that my daughter's been in bed for almost 5 days now. I had the same symptoms she did, but I'm recovering a lot quicker. Is that because I found things that work for me better than I found things that could work for her? Who knows? All I know, I'm just telling you that everybody's going to react to different things different ways, right? And that gets into my whole spiel about bacteria. So, the other thing you were talking about are scrapes and bruises and cuts, which you're going to get outside in nature during the summer, maybe more than you would, especially where you live in the Northeast. And so we also make a chelated silver oxide product. Instead of chelating the zinc with L-arginine, we chelate the silver with citric acid. And I know we'll get into more about citric acid because you know a lot more about the metabolic pathways and cell receptors than I do and how all that works. I just formulate that because we had a lot of success with the silver and the citric acid. But we took the chelated silver, which is chelated again with citric acid, and we put that into something called Nutrisporin and Rash Block. We started out Rash Block. Nobody knew what it was. And then I came up with this, I guess it was an epiphany. I said, everybody knows what Neosporin is, but Neosporin is a triple antibiotic gel or lotion or whatever. It's not a lotion, it's a gel. And it wipes out certain strains of bacteria, but it doesn't touch others. And it turns out for healing wounds or healing cuts or burns, that again, what you want to do is you want to retard the bacteria growth at that point. And the chelated silver oxide will wipe out all infectious bacteria. So getting back to the Nutrisporin, it wipes out not only infectious bacteria as a gel, we infuse the silver into the gel, but it actually wipes out urinary tract infection, UTI. So we had a woman call me from Bremerton, Washington, and Sue Honan. She ran two nursing care facilities. I didn't even know where Bremerton, Washington was. So she said, "Hey, Guerry, it's wiping out my UTI. I want to try it on my residents." That's what they call the people that are in their nursing care facilities. And I said, "Great, let's do it." She said, "The state of Washington will pay for the study. Let's do it." I said, "Great." So I actually went out there a couple times, did some talks. They had a doctor there, a Seventh-day Adventist. He prescribes Nutrisporin. He didn't want to use antibiotics because, that weakens the immune system over time. And of course, your body with antibiotics starts becoming resistant to the antibiotic over time, right? So turns out they had one woman there of the 12 that we studied. It was a small preclinical trial, and she was on hospice. She was getting UTI infections every week. And what happened was they started providing it for her directly on the urethra 3 times a day, morning, noon, and night. She never got another UTI and lived 9 more months in the nursing care facility. And she was getting infections every week. She was getting antibiotics every week, and she was going downhill fast. So we know that the chelated silver oxide is the magic ingredient there because we've tested it against MRSA, we've tested against E. coli, we've tested against mold and fungus and mildew. And it's amazing. We found that the silver, the chelated silver oxide chelated with citric acid, just wipes it out. Now, I think what's happening with
If I can interrupt for a
go ahead,
second,
yes, I'm
you were saying about the mold, E. coli, and things like that. Well,
yes,
there are we have a test called the Gut 360.
aha,
Where we take fecal matter test, we look at the population diversity, the pathogenic versus the beneficial, microbes, And yeah, some people can be higher in E. coli or, or even outside of that, having mold toxicity. Well, it's not like they're going to be taking the Nutrisporin and how can we?
Yeah, no,
And basically, for
we
those
do
of you
have it. We
just
do have
listening,
the
I
silver.
was
That's a good
exactly.
question.
I was just kind of showing like you're not going to be,
Right.
sucking on the tube of the Nutrisporin.
So
And
we,
what he's showing is silver infusion
right.
because we want to have that internally to help with the gastrointestinal system, with the your gut, to work and get rid of the bad guys. So if you could just two things. If you could speak into the use of the silver infusion to help with the internal dysbiosis of these pathogenic microbes, and then we'll jump over to the difference between the water soluble and the water insoluble forms of Nutrisporin.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. This product right here is our Silver Excelsior. So the big bottle I showed you is 150 parts per million. It turns out that chelated silver oxide with citric acid, we're actually making a silver citrate, and we make it with water and glycerin. So this is actually 4,000 parts per million, and as you can see, it's clear.
Mm-hmm.
You could never do that with colloidal silver. So colloidal silver is made in a bathtub. I'm oversimplifying. It's made in hopefully distilled or deionized water with 2 electrodes, right? And what you do is you run the current
Mm-hmm.
between a silver-coated electrode and a non-coated electrode, one positively charged, one negatively charged. And what happens is the silver ions migrate into the water. And what, companies that like Sovereign Silver, nothing wrong with colloidal silver. I'm not saying anything negative about it. It's just different. And so it takes a long time to get the concentration of colloidal silver to go up because it takes a lot of energy and a lot of time to get those silver ions to migrate. So you're buying 10 parts per million, which is 99.999% water. Now, nothing. I mean, they're selling it for a lot of money, and it does work, but it works differently because it's not bioactive. It's not bioavailable. You've got just this silver ion, positively charged silver ion, which is very effective, but at 10 parts per million, maybe not as effective as it needs to be in certain places or at certain times or as quickly. The 4,000 part per million product, we don't recommend that people take it directly. We recommend you take it and you dilute it down. An eyedropper of our 4,000 in an 8-ounce glass of water makes
That's
150 parts per million. So, you're buying water when you buy it ready to drink. I can tell you by experience, personally and with family and friends, that, and this is an unfortunate statement, but when you go out to eat or you go to the grocery store, E. coli is everywhere, right? And E. coli is pretty deadly stuff. There was a company, Jack in the Box, back in the 70s that was selling hamburgers that people ate and died. In today's world, I don't think Jack in the Box would have survived. And recently, Chipotle had the same problem. They were having E. coli breakouts. So our silver wipes out E. coli. And what does that mean? Well, we were at a family wedding. It was a big gathering in Germany, actually. It's the hottest day of the year, middle of July. It was an open buffet. And my kids were there. Everybody's getting their pictures taken, and I couldn't find them. Well, it turns out they had eaten this food off the buffet and head down, they were gone. And I was like, okay, 3:00 in the morning, take them back, 8 ounces of this stuff. Woke up the next day, 12 hours later, hungry. So if you've ever had E. coli poisoning, you're probably not going to wake up hungry. You're going to wake up thinking, what is it that I ate that I never want to see again? right?
Right.
So
Now, I will say, I actually got the concentrated one because
uh,
I mean, I always look into the logistics and the cost effectiveness. And I like the fact that you've got this concentrated amount, and all it is just one drop, not dropper full, one drop
right,
in 1 ounce of water
right,
does that correct dilution. And then I'll just make, like a mason jar, about 32 ounces or whatever, and put, the 32 drops in there. I will say for people, and this really gets from the science and all of this to the actuality. What are you actually going to be seeing? Now, even though that concentrate is more clear, when you do mix it, I did find that there was a very slight cloudiness. There's nothing wrong with that. So please
that's
don't think, oh,
interesting.
it's
No,
contaminated, I
that's
got to
very
toss it.
interesting.
Don't
So,
do that.
so what kind of
Okay.
water? What kind of
So
water did you mix it with?
well, actually, I made 2 batches because I gave one, to, my family at another house. Um, one was with spring water, and the other one was with, distilled water.
Well,
So
here's what I'll tell you. And I didn't see it, but I bet you the one with distilled water didn't turn very cloudy at all, and the one with spring water turned
no.
a lot more cloudy. And here's the reason:
Yes.
because the silver chelate, the citric silver citrate chelate, that molecule is very reactive. So what happens is silver will compound with any other mineral that's in the water, whether it's sodium, potassium, magnesium, whatever's in the water, it'll compound with. And so yes, if you use tap water, for example, it'll definitely get cloudy, and it'll get cloudy rapidly. So in one way, it's sort of a test to see how pure your water is,
Yeah, exactly.
right?
But I
It's not,
mean, it's not that it would lose its efficacy
no, you're
in
right.
what it's doing.
You're right. Well, yes
So
and no. Here's what I'll say to that. It won't, because the amount of efficacy that it might lose is so small a percentage that that would be so infinitesimal that I don't even know that you could study that. But I'm a very precise person in
yeah.
terms of science, right? And so, I write patents for a living, right? So, I mean, you have to be specific.
Mhm.
So the question is, well,
Yes.
what kind of water is going to make it less efficacious than the other kind of water? And I always recommend, if you're going to mix it, go and buy for $1 a gallon, buy a gallon of distilled water at the store. If you don't have a good water system, if you have a good water system or even well water, I mean, it's not going to be a problem. And you're right, it's not going to change the efficacy. If it does, it's so slight you'd never even hardly be able to measure it. You're absolutely right.
But taking, this internally is very helpful, to get those. Have you looked into seeing how it may affect beneficial microorganisms, or is it more focusing and not allowing the bad guys to grow?
Right, right, right. Well, it's definitely more focusing and not allowing the bad guys to grow. There's no question about that, and I'll tell you in a minute. We have a little story about that. Um, but the answer to your question is, when somebody drinks something or eats something or breathes, hopefully they're bringing in good bacteria all the time, right? The stuff you want to not bring into your system is the bad bacteria when you're in the airport breathing, or when you're in the airplane breathing. I think the airport's worse than the airplane, because the airplanes have, HEPA filters and the airports don't. But anyway, that's another long story, and we won't get into all that. But at least not on this podcast. So I think the thing is, your immune system, normally can handle all this infectious bacteria that comes in through the food, through the water, through the air. I mean, you don't get E. coli poisoning every time you eat fish or raw hamburger meat or what. You don't get, your immune system can overcome a lot, right? So you can have a stomach ache after you eat something. I don't feel quite right, but you don't get violently ill, or you don't feel like you want to die. So my point is, you can always take pre and probiotics. You can always do that to benefit your flora, fauna, whatever you want to call your gut, intestinal, bacterial tract, and all the stuff that goes on along with that, which you, Dr. Lara, know much more about than me. But I would also say your immune system sometimes needs help. And so really what the silver will do is it'll wipe out infectious bacteria and mold and mildew and fungus, as we talked about. And we've tested it, like I said, against a lot of different things. People don't realize Muhammad Ali died of MRSA, which is staph, in the hospital in Louisville. The hospital never released that information because they would have lost their funding. So so turns out that the Nutrisporin and the chelated silver oxide, which is the active ingredient in the Nutrisporin, we wipe out MRSA. And it turns out Neosporin doesn't touch it. So Neosporin, as we mentioned, 3 antibiotics, mycins, right?
Mhm.
And they wipe out certain strains of bacteria, but they don't touch others. They don't touch MRSA. And that allows MRSA to proliferate because it's wiping out all the competition, right? So that's, and then you asked the other question, which I thought I'd get to. So we also make this thing called hangover block or liver cleanse. And this product, we put a little bit of silver in there because we have 4 herbs that are in glycerin, which is sugar. And we put magnesium citrate in there as well. And what happened over time, which is why I had to take it out of the refrigerator earlier this morning, is that it started growing a fungus. And I was like, wait a minute, the silver should stop anything like that from happening. And so we looked at it and we said, this isn't good. We actually gave this away at one of the biohack conferences, the one in Beverly Hills, at the Beverly Hills Hilton. And I was like, uh-oh. Michelle, who's our business manager, paralegal, said, this is bad. We need to get this tested. And I was like, yeah, because there's this white sort of fluffy fungus stuff that was growing in our product. And of course, it took time for that to happen. It didn't happen in one day. It took several months. But still, it shouldn't have happened. I'm thinking, what is that? So we sipped it out. We had it analyzed. It turns out that it's a non-toxic fungus, that it grows in the soil in Hawaii. We buy the 4 herbs from one farm in Hawaii, which gives organic herbs in glycerin. And what had happened was it was too expensive to buy the herbs in 2-ounce bottles. So I said, let's order it in bulk. So we got it in bulk, but they didn't tell us that in bulk, unless you read the fine print, that it's not filtered. So the stuff we were getting in the 2-ounce was filtered and didn't have any organic debris for stuff to grow in, right? So what this all told me is we finally found something that the silver didn't wipe out, but that this Pseudomonas fungus, which did grow in there, was not toxic to humans and was not toxic to the plants. In fact, supported plant growth. But of course, we don't want any white fluffy stuff growing in our products. So we had to start doing filtration to make sure that the bulk stuff that we're using is clean and won't grow fungus. But taking the bulk.
Well, I will say that, our guts have fungus. Actually, it's the Ascomycota phylum that, that family that's in there, and that works synergistically and together with the bacterium that we have. And actually, Dr. Grune, who is the founder and CEO, one of the co-founders, he and his son, of Biome, which is the company we've partnered with for our Gut 360, beautifully explains this. Cash actually interviewed him. The episode just came out, I think, like last week.
Oh, wow.
And amazing information, just brilliant. And so, yes, we have fungus in our guts, and this is
among
okay.
us.
We just want to make sure it's the right kind. Yeah, exactly. So, a quick question.
Sure.
Can you have too much of the silver?
Yes, I think the answer is
people are like, oh, I want to take care of this, and
well,
so can we have?
Great question. You're so smart, so intelligent. So I think it's true. So the answer to that question is, I think the answer is you can OD on it if you want to turn yourself into a blue Smurf, which a guy in Kentucky did 10 years ago, and then died of a heart attack. So the I think the FDA probably made this up, right? But the answer to your question is you can die of any too much of anything. There's people who've died of hydrosis,
Even water.
right? People who've
Yes.
died of hydrosis,
Yep.
and I'm like, seriously, you can drink too much water and die? And the answer is yes, you can. So
Mhm.
yeah, you can take too much
It
silver.
dilutes
Will
the
it kill you?
body.
I don't know if it would
Yeah.
kill you. You can turn blue. So arginosis is the word they came up with, which literally means, silver sickness, right? Or right.
Mhm.
So people don't realize, and I think I may have told Cash this. So the word blue blood, which people
Mhm.
associate with people who were born into wealth, I think, right? How did that happen?
Mhm.
Well, it turns out it was the French aristocracy that was back in the 16, 1700s. They were eating off of silverware, and they were drinking out of silver goblets and whatever all the time. And since they were very, very pale and light skinned, their blood turned a little bluish over time. What they don't tell
Mhm.
you is that none of the aristocracy ever died from the bubonic plague. And you can look it up, it's an historical fact.
Yeah.
So all the people that were living in the, outside of the castle or wherever the aristocracy was living, the palace, right? They were all susceptible to bubonic plague, which is the bacteria from that rats were carrying around. And the aristocracy, who were the blue bloods, they didn't die. So there must
Yeah.
be something about that, right? And of course, that brings me into a whole nother discussion, which uh, is really a very serious thing, and that is cancer. So I say, and you know this, and there's tons of white papers, scientific papers, whatever you want to call them, journal articles published about different bacteria causing cancer, right? So E. coli has been linked directly to stomach cancer. And I ask people, how many different types of cancer are there? A ton, right? It's a lot. How many different types of bacteria? A lot. So my theory, and I don't know if it's a theory, I think it's probably proven, is that if your immune system is not capable of, let's say, wiping out a certain strain of infectious bacteria, that that can cause damage in your body. You can start getting mutation, and that could lead to how many ever number millions of cells, maybe even hundreds of millions of cells that become cancerous, that then you have cancer, right? Or you're diagnosed with cancer. And, it's not only true for E. coli, which is stomach cancer, a direct cause and direct relationship, but, the vaccine for vaginal cancer. It turns out the vaccine for vaginal cancer wipes out the infectious bacteria that causes vaginal cancer. And so I don't know, you have a daughter, so everybody, parents, people my age and younger, they have to make a decision about whether their daughter should have the uh, what do you call the vaccine for vaginal
HPV.
cancer.
Yeah. Yeah, that could take us down a whole other
It could.
rabbit
It
hole,
could.
and
My
and
point
I
is
definitely want
my
to.
point of all that
Yeah.
is, if it's infectious bacteria and your immune system can't handle it for whatever reason, then, obviously taking the silver proactively is not a bad idea either. What do I mean by proactively? Well, we make it a spray. I carry this with me in the airport. I'd rather use this, which is just silver and water. This doesn't even have any glycerin in it. No, it does. I'm sorry. This does. It's glycerin, water, and silver. And, I can spray this in my mouth. I can spray it on my hands. It's not alcohol, so it doesn't dry my skin out. And guess what?
Right.
It's better than the hand sanitizers. And the hand sanitizers,
Oh
by
yeah.
definition, have to be 60% alcohol, right? Which is crazy, but that's,
Very
again,
right.
FDA
Yeah.
regs. So I'm just saying, if you carry it with you when you travel, and of course, when in the summer people like to travel, this is another way to
Mhm.
prevent, you hopefully getting sick or being exposed to infectious bacteria that might be causing things going on in your system that your immune system, for whatever reason, your immune system can't help. And, you know more about this than I do, Dr. Lara, but as you get older, your immune system is less efficient. I mean, it's just
Right.
unfortunately the way life
Yeah.
is, right?
Well, and that's what we're trying to do, and unfortunately, a lot of that is because of the toxins we are exposed to. The allostatic load builds up over time. So these are all of the stresses, emotional, chemical, physical, etc., that build up over time. So it just goes to reason, the longer that we are around, the higher that load can be. So yeah, that does happen, but it doesn't mean we have to be subject or victim to it. And the way that that happens is by taking the proactive steps of lowering the toxic load, helping our bodies to detoxify, like with your liver cleanse,
Yes.
doing these things, eating healthy, getting sleep, doing the plethora of the holistic, healthful things that the majority of our audience knows. But getting back more to the minute, situational things, like we were talking about the Nutrisporin and the fact that, for example, one of my little anecdotal situations is that I had purchased some Nutrisporin. I ended up getting the water soluble, and I was wiping up dog hair because it's spring and the dogs are shedding and just it's all over the place. Anyway, we have wood floors. I was wiping it up, ended up getting a splinter in the top of my finger. And it was a good splinter and it was kind of deep. I'm like, okay, so I'm digging this out with the tweezers and, peeling away lots of layers of skin to dig it out. Finally got it out, washed my hand, and I'm like, I've got Nutrisporin. Let's test this out. So I put some of that on, and of course, because it's water soluble, put a Band-Aid on it to protect it because it's the tip of my finger. I mean, washing my hands and, working on the keyboard. I was like, okay. Didn't think about it, didn't have soreness, usually how it gets red and sore and tender, and none of that. The next day, I took the Band-Aid off. There was no redness, no swelling. The only little red was only where I removed the layers of skin to dig it out.
Right.
But it was just like, wow, holy crap. I mean, it really, really worked well. I also had given it to my daughter-in-law because she had a little bit of a hangnail, but she didn't use it right away. And her finger was red, swollen, tender. And I'm like, here, put this on. So she put it on, put a Band-Aid on. Later that day, the swelling and the soreness had already massively reduced. By the next day, it was gone. I mean, it was just amazing. So this is the science in me, and I know theoretically, of course, this is supposed to work, but to actually have it, happen is amazing. So, couple different things here, because I want to briefly talk about the difference between the soluble and soluble water, insoluble, but I definitely want to jump into how a study that was recently published, January of 2022, that talked about the effects of vitamin D3 and silver nanoparticles in healing capacity in wound repair. Because I think that's very important, seeing that being out in the sun, getting the vitamin D, or also if you are supplementing and then with silver, or, how this can work in wound healing. So first, water soluble, insoluble.
Yeah. So we make two versions. So this product is the one you used for your finger, and that is the water soluble version. So the only difference between the water soluble version, and it comes in an orange package also, but it's an orange tube. The only difference between the two is we use beeswax to make it water resistant, we call it. Why? Well, first of all, again, with this product, it's 3 ingredients. So it's glycerin, ceteroglucoside, which is a plant fat. If you've ever boiled vegetables and saw the globules come to the surface, that's ceteroglucoside. You probably know that, but your listeners may not. And then we mix those together, and that was actually a mistake in the lab, which we patented, which we make something called Neutrolium. And that's, we sell Neutrolium in like a 3-ounce tub, like this product here. And we make both a water resistant and a water soluble version of that. Alternative to Vaseline, right? Alternative to petroleum jelly. Petroleum jelly literally has polyaromatic hydrocarbons in it, which are carcinogenic. You wouldn't want to put those in your mouth. This stuff, food grade edible ingredients only, put it in your mouth. We then infuse into this the silver to make the Nutrisporin, and then we infuse the beeswax to make the water resistant version. The water resistant version is really great for overnight topicals, because what will happen with the green product, the water soluble product, it'll seep in quickly. So if you've got an immediate, like you did it right. So you you have the splinter, you pulled it out, you put the stuff on, it went in there, it did its job. Next day you looked at it, it was good. If overnight, again, you put this one on, the water resistant version, it would stay on longer. And the reason that all happened was we were already doing it. We knew that there was a difference. But Sue Honan, the lady at the nursing care facility in Bremerton, Washington, who did the study, and she's an LPN, now retired, but she said, Gary, I've got two facilities. I've got one that's long-term, and then I've got one where the patients have mental handicaps like Parkinson's, Alzheimer's. And she said, what I want to do is I want something that'll stay on longer, because those patients are bowel incontinent. And so that's why the water-resistant Nutrisporin became a big deal. But if you think about it, even for UTI, we like to say that this is a preventative. Whereas if you've got a UTI bloom.
And when you're saying, for those people not watching a video,
right.
When he said this is preventative, he's talking about the orange one that is water insoluble.
Right, with the beeswax.
So that is the preventative, but the water soluble is more for the acute infection that can be used immediately. Beautiful. Thank you for that. Okay, so let's dive into, briefly, because we are, coming up upon the hour, talking about this paper that I came across that I shared with you.
Yes.
And really for the audience, and we can actually put a link to the show notes, if you're interested in geeking out and reading some of this. But basically, the title is The Effect of Vitamin D3 and Silver Nanoparticles on HACAT Cell Viability. And what HACAT is, they are human keratinocytes, basically skin cells. Okay. And the study was done in a petri dish. By the way, it's Cataldi et al., the rest of the group that did the study. And really what they were looking at is vitamin D3, of course, known to regulate bone homeostasis and, all of these different tissues and the wonderful plethora of things that the hormone D3 does, but also that they found that it was able to increase wound healing, with respect to, an actual cut. Okay, this is what they were looking at. And that was from a previous study. And they were thinking, oh, okay, well, silver is known to help with infections, etc. So what if we marry the two? And how will this work in the efficacy of the wound healing? Will it not do anything? Will it make it worse? Will it make it better? Well, long story short, they actually found that the wound healed at a much faster rate when the D3 was with the silver. Which amazing finding. And again, this study was published in the International Journal of Molecular Sciences back in January 2022. So this is a recent paper. So thinking about that, how are your products in association? Obviously you don't have the D3 in the Nutrisporin.
Not yet.
But, I just want to get your quick take on that.
Well, it's a pretty amazing study. And honestly, something I didn't even think about, putting that together. And more about, the metabolic pathways and cellular behavior than I do. So I sort of throw that back into your expertise. But I would say that, we do make a D3K2 product. We chelate it with citric acid to make it bioactive and bioavailable. At least that's the purpose. And before we started having this podcast, you were saying, well, do we have any studies on that? And the answer is no, we don't. I wish we did, but it turns out that I did get a call from a woman who does private label our product. And she said her daughter-in-law has a vitamin D level that had dropped. And, I think the optimal levels are somewhere between 20 and 60 milligrams per liter or something. Just
Well, okay,
Right.
for vitamin D,
Yeah.
generally, well, I just want for clarity for the
Yes.
audience
Yeah.
is that when you have a vitamin D test, it's usually the 25 hydroxy D, okay, vitamin
Right.
D, and the reference range that you'll see in your lab tests will be 30 to 100 nanograms per milliliter.
Thank you. Nanograms per
Now,
milliliter. Thank you.
generally, I don't like to see people's levels below 50.
Aha.
More like, optimal, I'd like to see them more like 70, 80. That is what I find to be functional optimal. Okay, but definitely not below 50 nanograms per milliliter.
Nanograms.
Okay, go
Thank you.
ahead.
No, that's good. No, that's what I needed. And so it turns out, and you know more about this than I do, it turns out that there's a whole bunch of studies on vitamin D when it's with K, it's transported and can be transporting calcium out of the blood into the bone. And of course, that's my oversimplified knowledge of this, right? There's a lot that goes on there that you could probably talk about for another hour. But the point being that if you have D and K, that you can actually transport the calcium to where it needs to be, which is in the bone, and you don't want it in the arteries and then in your bloodstream. Hardening of the arteries is usually from calcium. So, and then of course we already make the chelated silver oxide for wound healing. It seems to be things go in cycles, right? This whole vitamin D thing has been most doctors now that you go to, they'll internists, whatever, over the last 10 years, everybody's vitamin D levels are too low. And of course, in the winter, they're even lower, right? Especially up in the Northeast and further north and places where there's not a lot of sunlight. So I think the thing would be interesting to see if you kept your vitamin D levels up and also wanted to wound heal with topical exteriors, whether or not that would be, how would that be how would that result in people's overall ability to heal more quickly? I think the thing is, you and I would both agree, if your vitamin D levels are optimal, your immune system's probably optimal, and everything is going to work better than if it's not, right?
Well,
So,
vitamin D is necessary for good gut health. Your immune system is based on your gut. They go hand in hand. So, that really makes a huge difference. And with the gut brain connection, the health of your gut will tell you the health of your brain. If
right,
you have leaky gut, you'll probably have leaky brain as well, and with all the metabolites that are being created by the gut biome, those react and regulate mood, okay, your neurotransmitters and different biochemical reactions that happen in the brain. And this is one of the reasons why when you have low vitamin D or when vitamin D levels go down during the winter, people get that seasonal affective disorder,
right, right.
because of these low vitamin D levels. I mean, I've been there myself. My vitamin D levels have gotten down as low as 12.
Wow.
And boy, I could feel it when I started dosing and supplementing with D3. What a difference. This was years ago. But I mean, it was just like amazing. And something I want to mention to people when it comes to vitamin D in the genetic aspect, yes, you need to have sunlight and sunlight exposure. All right. When we're talking about vitamin D, the particular nanometer waves of light, okay, when you are actually producing vitamin D is when those nanometers of light are between 290 and 315. And I know this is kind of getting more in the physics of it, that electromagnetic spectrum, which I really would have loved to have dived into more today, but out of time and so much wonderful information. Uh, but you know, there are issues sometimes with people in the conversion of the D2 that we get from the sun and converting that into D3, and into that form of 25 hydroxy uh, D in our livers, and then the bioactive form in the kidneys, which unfortunately I don't have a lot of time to actually go through that. I'll have to make a video on how all that works. Um,
Definitely.
So
Definitely.
this is where if you don't convert very well, then taking the supplement is beneficial. And then there's the transport gene, okay, which is the GC gene or the vitamin D binding protein. And then you have your vitamin D receptor. How well are you, actually utilizing the vitamin D that's in the system to get into the tissues, get into the cells themselves? This is all very important, and this is where the K2 and magnesium come in, because when vitamin D is in the body, it liberates it. It pulls that calcium into the blood. It says, "Hey, I need calcium here." And if you don't have, calcium from your food, it will take it from wherever it can get it. Well, where do we have the most calcium? In our bones, in our teeth. Well, we don't want a lot of free flowing calcium in the blood because that can increase the risk of calcification. Calcium and phosphates actually, are very synergistic and work together. And, there's again the whole biochemical process there. But when we're talking about vitamin K, I do want to be conscientious and have people knowledgeable, because there's actually three types of vitamin K: vitamin K1, 2, and 3. We're not going to worry about 3, that's very minute, but K1, um, you need to be mindful because that works more with blood clotting and things like that. And if you are on any type of blood thinners, warfarin, things like that, your doctor, if he has you on it, or she would tell you, be careful of your K1, any supplementation or whatever else. What we're talking about when we say D3 and vitamin K, we're talking about K2. This is different. This is very important. And there's actually 2 types of vitamin K2. There's the MK4 and MK7. MK4 stands for menaquinone 4, and then there's the menaquinone 7. Now, what's the difference between them? The menaquinone 4, that is where it's found in like fermented foods and natto, the Japanese, the soybeans, that kind of, I tried it, not too much of a fan, but anyway. Where your MK7, this is more of your leafy greens and things like that. That actually lasts a little bit longer in the system. So you will see either a combination or one or the other when you find them in vitamin D supplementation, when it has the K2 included. And why the K2 is so important is because it's the K2 that helps to bring that calcium back into the bones, like what Dr. Guerry had mentioned, at the beginning of this podcast. So again, we want to get that calcium back in the bones to where it should be. And so that's why it's good. And there's actually some new research out between last year and this year that actually supports even more the studies on that combination. And of course, magnesium does help with the utilization, the metabolization of D3. So this all works synergistically, and you guys have your formulation with D3 and K2, and I believe you had said it's with the MK7.
It is. I checked on that too. It is. And of course we chelate that with citric acid also, and that's our D3K2 product right here, which is, obviously in water soluble, and we made it that way so it would be bioactive and bioavailable. And we talked about potentially putting it into MCT oil or something like that, which I think great idea. There's a whole bunch we can discuss. But you brought up something that is very interesting. We could leave with this because it is summer coming up, and we do make sunscreen. That's how the whole company started, right? Third Rock Sunblock Sunscreen. This is one of our products. You mentioned UVB and UVA. So it turns out people don't realize that UVB is the only thing that SPF has to do with sun protection factor. So let's say you or me, we're in this, because we're Caucasian, we're out in the sun on a day like today here, Virginia Beach, bright sunlight, no clouds, 20 minutes in the sun, you're starting to turn pink. The reason that that's happening is your body's telling you you're starting to burn. You better get out of the sun. You've got all the vitamin D you need for the day. 20 minutes of broad sunlight on your skin. And of course, for me anyway, that is a way better way to get vitamin D than a supplement. It's just, my body works that way. I don't know if everybody's does, but you talked about receptors and how that all works. And that's probably another podcast, and we could delve into it more. But what's interesting is sun protection factor 30, let's say SPF 30 times 20 is 600 minutes of protection. We make 35, but whatever. So 30 times 20, SPF 30 times 20 minutes is 600 minutes of protection from UVB only. Has nothing to do with UVA. Turns out UVA, which are the longer penetrating rays, above 315 nanometers all the way to at least 400 nanometers, that UVA is causing DNA damage, aging, and wrinkling. And if your immune system's impaired, like my two 20-year-old buddies who at different times were diagnosed with melanoma and got, told the same thing, keep surfing, you'll get it again, quit surfing at age 20, probably ate at McDonald's every day, right? Their immune systems were impaired. It wasn't in their family's history that they got sunscreen, sun poisoning or skin cancer, sorry. But the point of all this is, it's, for me, 20 minutes in the sun is, I'm just starting to get in the water, So I'm going to be by definition overexposed to UVA, which are the killer rays. And if you've ever woken up sore the next morning, and you know about this probably, again, more than I do, Dr. Lara, but soreness comes in this case from UVA, which is causing scission or destruction of nerve cells, which then causes pain. That's why you're sore. Mm-hmm. So all I can say is SPF is important if you don't want to burn, but it's actually giving you a false sense of security because you're not turning, red, but you're still getting all that UVA, unless the sunscreen is protecting you from UVA. And of course, our sunscreen covers the entire spectrum. And that's what, we show in this plot here with this, right. The green line is the spectrum from UVB to UVA. And as you can see, our green line is different than the red and the blue line. The red and the blue line is everybody else's mineral sunscreen. The reason that changes is because everybody else's mineral sunscreen is in water, turns into zinc or titanium hydroxide, which doesn't give you the same UVA and UVB protection. Well, not the same UVA protection. You get the same UVB protection because the SPF numbers are the same. But again, remember, SPF only.
And I want to mention for our audio listeners, he was holding up a graph showing efficacy for the protection of UVA as compared to other products. Correct?
Correct.
Please correct me if I'm wrong on that.
Correct. No, you're right.
And that graph will be included in the show notes, as well as it is available on their website. And actually, and I do apologize, eating a little bit more into the time for people, but I would like to, if there are any last comments that you have on that, and then we can give everybody where they can find you, where they can find your products and the other information. So is there anything else?
Yeah, no, that's great. I think the plot that I showed, as you mentioned, just shows that basically what we did is take what the lifeguards put on their nose, which is pure zinc oxide, and made it into a lotion. And that green line that you'll see on the plot is what pure zinc oxide is in terms of UVA and UVB absorption. And of course, mineral sunscreens also reflect. They don't only absorb, they also reflect the light. So that's why, mineral sunscreens, if you have a choice, are going to be better, but be careful because there's a lot of toxins in what they call the non-actives, the other stuff, right? And yeah, as far as finding us is concerned, we're at Third Rock Essentials, the number 3RD, ROCK essentials.com. We prefer to sell off of our website. We do sell on Amazon, but we have an affiliate program, no obligation, no minimum payments or anything. Nothing. We give a 20% discount and a 20% commission for anybody who becomes an affiliate at thirdrockstar.com, www.3rdrockstar.com. And the reason we can do that is because Amazon takes about 60% of our gross. So we're happy to give 40% away to the people who are going to tell everybody else, what our products are like, how good they are, and what they can help you with. So the 20% discount is for anybody who uses your code, including you, and then a 20% commission for any of your family members, friends, whatever. You get a 20% commission directly to you after I think you sell $100 or buy $100 worth of product. So, and that's forever, right? For as long as you are a customer, you'll get that 40%, basically 20% commission, 20% reduction in the price. So we encourage everybody to sign up as
really. Yeah, we really appreciate that. And I mean, I will tell you, people out there, I've been using their products. Their products work. They really have been wonderful. And actually, we've touched upon this wonderful cache of stuff that you can get and bring with you on your camping and beach trips and everything else. And actually, something else I have to say that I've used and I love is the deodorant spray.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, that works. And it will last a few days. I mean, it's just amazing from shower to shower. It is fantastic. So throwing that little pearl out there at the very end, it really is wonderful.
Well, you mentioned that our products are, all of our products are TSA. So everything you can carry on your purse or on the plane, except of course, the 16-ounce bottle, right? Everything else you can carry with you on all your trips this summer, wherever you go. Good. It's good to be able to do that. Obviously, you want to take it on the plane, you can use it. And the reason that the deodorant spray works and the breath spray, we make a breath spray too, is when bacteria dies, it smells. It gives off an odor.
Yeah.
So we call it odor block, right? And the silver is in there so that, first of all, so bacteria won't grow. If it doesn't grow, it won't die. And if it doesn't die, you don't stink. So, and of course, it's not an antiperspirant. That's another long story. It's not an antiperspirant. Deodorant spray.
Hey, I'll tell you. Okay, black box. It works.
It works. I love
Spray it on. It works.
I love
it. And I love because I like wearing black and I don't like the white marks. And it does not do that. So,
cool.
I mean, hey, win-win there. So I want to say, oh my gosh, thank you so much. So much information. We could go on for hours. I appreciate listeners out there, hanging in with us a little bit longer than usual. But I think that the ROI on this podcast, on this discussion, way outweighs, any extra time that you may have taken. Just fantastic. Please, go to their website, take a look at their products, make use of the discounts, of the sales that they, will periodically throw up there. I know that it'll be a little late, for listeners when this comes out, but they're currently doing a Cinco de Mayo a sale, but they will have others. So please check back.
Oh, absolutely. We'll have a Mother's Day special. Absolutely. And all summer long, we'll be having sunscreen sales. Absolutely.
Excellent. And I love the fact that you have it for babies and infants. This is wonderful because my little granddaughter's 13 months old. And we're very protective of what we put on her. So this is,
as you know, the baby, since you have a grandbaby, they put everything in their mouths.
Yes.
Right.
Precisely.
So we say if you wouldn't put it in your mouth, don't put it on your skin. And we mean it, and that's for all humans, right? Not just adults.
Absolutely.
Right.
Again, thank you so much for joining us today. I've really enjoyed, I always enjoy our talks.
Me too.
I really enjoyed the information and I hope our audience has enjoyed it as much as I have. So many blessings to all of you. Be delightful, be joyous, enjoy this summer, but also protect yourself when those little mishaps can happen. So have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Dr. Lara.
Much.
See you.
Bye-bye.